Hey guys, tonight we're not telling the story of beloved kings or glorious empires. We're telling the story of a man who refused to die, an emperor who built an entire underground universe just to make sure that even after his flesh rotted, his power would remain. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, and the first man who tried to rule the afterlife. Thousands of clay soldiers, real weapons, real architecture, hidden traps, not built to fight, but built to scare you, to scare the future, to scare history itself. And the terrifying part is it worked. So before we descend into this maze of obsession and silence, take a moment to subscribe and like the video. But only if stories like these are your kind of strange comfort. Only if you feel like you can't look away from power that's already dead and somehow still watching. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Maybe across time zones and centuries, someone else is listening with you right now. Now, dim the lights. Take a deep breath. And imagine you're standing in a field, surrounded by 8,000 unblinking eyes, all of them staring at you. If you have ever thought that death was the end, then Qin Shi Huang would scoff in your face and send 8,000 terracotta warriors to prove just how terribly wrong you are. He did not see a tomb as a place to rest. He saw it as an eternal personal profile, a resume buried beneath the earth, sent straight into the universe where he screams at history, "Do not you dare swipe past me," and that is exactly how it is. You cannot just scroll past the Terracotta Army without being pulled in. Each statue stands nearly 6.5 feet tall, or about 2 meters towering, like they are ready to unfollow anyone who refuses to recognize the authority of the man buried in the center. They do not smile, they do not nod, they do not bow. They just stare, as if programmed to make you feel small, foolish, and painfully out of your depth. You think you have seen legacy. Wait until you are standing in the middle of a porcelain battlefield where every single statue has a different face, as if each one was sculpted from the ID photo of a real soldier. No repeats, no copies. Just one absolute consistency all of them serve. One man. What they call the Terracotta Army is not a work of art. It is a massive propaganda machine, handmade, powered by fear, and built for one single purpose: to make sure no one dares forget a man who lived and died with an ego bigger than the empire he built. Qin Shi Huang did not build his tomb to be admired. He built it to dominate. Not everyone gets to enter, and almost no one dares to go too deep. Archaeologists call it a wonder. Historians call it a symbol. But we can call it what it truly is: a message sent to the future, written in clay, signed with power, and sealed with the obsession of immortality. He does not need your worship. He only needs you to feel watched. And you will. When you are surrounded by thousands of unblinking eyes in a graveyard, with no gravestones, no names, only silence, order, and the unsettling feeling that you have just clicked on a profile the algorithm could never recommend. Because it does not need to be recommended. It exists on its own as an anchor point of human memory. In today's world, we post pictures to get likes. Qin Shi Huang raised statues to inspire fear. His hook is not in what he says, but in what cannot be denied scale. 8,000 warriors, hundreds of horses, real weapons, real architecture, a world running without a ruler because it has only one master, the man buried at its core. And he does not lie there as a corpse. He lies there like an operating system running in the background. Just like how you still open Netflix even when you have forgotten your password, the system is still there, waiting for you, suggesting things to you, influencing you. So is the tomb of Qin Shi Huang. It does not ask for your belief. It only needs you to know. To know that there was once a man who built an entire empire just to build himself another one underground. To know that there was once a man who used porcelain to shape his ego larger than any dynasty, more enduring than any government. To know that sometimes art is not born from inspiration, but from meticulously organized delusion. And that is the biggest twist of all: everyone dies. But not everyone makes future generations line up and buy tickets just to feel threatened. Qin Shi Huang did that. And that is why 2,000 years later, you are still hearing about him. On some random night, through some random screen, with a strange feeling. Damn it, he is still watching. If history were a television show, then Qin Shi Huang would absolutely refuse to leave the stage just because the closing music started to play. He was the kind of main character who not only wanted to control the plot while he was alive, but also insisted on writing the script for future generations with himself at the center forever. No filler episodes, no open endings. To put it in more modern terms, he did not just want to control the group chat. He wanted to moderate the artificial intelligence in it too. The unification of China for the first time in history was a remarkable achievement. But to Qin Shi Huang, it was not the peak, it was merely the starting point. What followed was a series of moves, as if he were playing a game of reorganizing the universe from standardizing measurements, axle widths, all the way to the written language. The Chinese script at the time had countless regional variations, no problem. Now everyone had to write in one font called Seal script. Think of it as the ancient version of Helvetica, ensuring that when he ordered an execution, no one in the southern provinces would mistake it for an invitation to tea. In his hands, the Chinese Empire became a beta version of a state-level operating system. No bugs, no multiple languages, no user feedback allowed. Anyone with opinions had their account permanently deleted. Only one valid user remained himself. But this control was not just policy, it was obsession. The kind that keeps you awake at night, not because of chaos, but because after death would the world still run according to specs. For Qin Shi Huang, maintaining order after death was almost more important than ruling while alive. And that is when the tomb began to take shape, not as a resting place, but as a backup empire. A cloned regime complete with soldiers, officials, defense systems, and operating procedures. Death was not the end. It was just a version update from Emperor Qin v1.0 to Eternal Emperor v2.0. If you think Elon Musk is trying to upload his consciousness to the cloud to live forever, then Qin Shi Huang already did that 2,000 years ago with clay soldiers and the sweat of tens of thousands of forced laborers. The Terracotta Army is the Emperor's will uploaded to the Cloud Classic format, no servers but fully armored. We often say life is impermanent, power is fleeting, but to Qin Shi Huang, everything had to be permanent. Death did not mean letting go. On the contrary, death was merely a transitional phase in his plan to control the entire universe. His obsession with control extended to even the tiniest details. Inside the tomb, the walls were decorated with intricate simulations of the night sky. Not to soothe the soul, but to replicate celestial order as a model of the mandate of heaven. Perhaps he believed if he could master the artificial version of the cosmos, he could hack the real one too. At this point, Qin Shi Huang was no longer a king. He was a cosmic engineer rewriting the entire code of space-time politics posterity. Nothing was allowed to flow freely. Everything had to have a position, a form, a function, even after rotting away. Like a Hollywood director obsessed with continuity, he wanted to ensure that even the stray pieces of straw in the background were on brand. And if an extra actor messed up the scene, simple replace them with a statue. That is why now we understand none of the terracotta soldiers ever look the viewer in the eye. They are not allowed to have personalities. They have only one task: to be the background to his power. An 8,000 pixel backdrop built not to fight, but to deliver one message: I am still here. His control had no endpoint. It was not the kind of control meant to maintain order. It was control designed to preserve the ego. Qin Shi Huang did not want to rule for a single lifetime. He wanted to rule the very concept of time itself. And like all those obsessed with absolute power, he could not stand the thought of a world where he was no longer the center. So he built another world. A world with no surprises, no feedback, no failures. A total sandbox where he is God, and all of us, whether alive or long turned to dust, are just viewers locked outside the loading screen, forever. If you think building a tomb just takes a hole in the ground, a few slabs of stone, some rituals, and a final handful of dirt, then you have clearly never met Qin Shi Huang. To him, death was not pulling the plug on life. It was a reboot into a different operating system, one where he still held admin privileges and no one dared log out. That massive tomb was not just a resting place. It was an underground real estate project on the scale of a full-blown city. It had palaces. It had treasure vaults. It had watchtowers. It even had a river system made of mercury. Yes, mercury, not water, not beer, but that toxic metal so deadly that inhaling it too long would make your brain want to pack up and leave. But why build a chemical city for a man who was already dead? The answer lies in obsession, the recreation of the world. Not the real world, but a version approved by the emperor, one without rebellious ministers, no traitors, no freedom. A utopia rendered in clay and built on the blood of laborers. Qin Shi Huang did not just want to die in peace. He wanted to continue living inside a sandbox model where every NPC was absolutely loyal, every storyline was pre-written, and he, of course, was the only player. A simulated universe in a pre-digital age but fully operational population, economy, military defense, and political propaganda. Think of it like playing The Sims, except you are in God mode, and the Sims are 6-foot-tall statues wearing real armor and holding real weapons. The layout of the tomb was not random. Every element followed the logic of urban design: central axis corridors, barracks, logistics zones. Archaeologists have found models of warehouses, stables, chariots, and entire military units positioned in strategic formations accurate to the warfare of that era. Not built to impress tourists, but to be ready just in case someone or something breached his domain after death. We call it an archaeological museum, but to Qin Shi Huang, it was a strategic backup command center. No one knows exactly what he imagined would happen after death. But one thing is certain: he believed he would still be in charge. Unlike most people who hope to rest in peace, he wanted to continue managing. The incredible detail of the construction, from the angle of each arrow to the fingerprints on the clay armor, shows he did not want a symbolic replica. He wanted a viable one, a post-mortem world that could actually function. As if, should the heavens allow his spirit to return, he could log right back into the tomb and resume governing the underground empire. Compared to the Egyptian pyramids, which were essentially luxury suites for the afterlife, Qin Shi Huang's complex was a political ecosystem. A full infrastructure designed so he could live forever in his own imagined reality, untouchable by anyone else. If you were a control-obsessed dictator, could you sleep peacefully, knowing that after your death, chaos might break out, your name might be forgotten, your statues torn down, your books rewritten? For Qin Shi Huang, the answer was no. So he built a copy of the real world with himself at the center. Imagine falling into a dream where everyone follows a script you wrote, their eyes never leave you. No questions are ever asked, no head ever dares to shake, no. That is not a fantasy anymore. It is control disorder turned into architecture. And the terrifying part is it worked, at least visually. Over 2,000 years later, we still stand in silence before the Terracotta Army, as if we have stepped into an empire that never truly ended. Even though the Qin dynasty lasted only a few decades, the virtual universe he created has outlived the actual regime. It is one of the strangest victories in history. An emperor who lost his country but kept the impression. A political universe that failed, but the simulated one became immortal. We call it a tomb. To Qin Shi Huang, it was the command center of the afterlife. And you, whether you believe it or not, are still walking through the dream he built 2 millennia ago. There is a chilling truth hidden beneath the solemn beauty of the Terracotta Army. It was the work of thousands of people, but not one of them ever told the story of how it was made. Not because they were humble, not because they were too busy, but because they died. All of them. Gone as if they never existed. Sounds like the plot of an ancient true crime documentary, exactly. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang is one of the rare architectural projects where the entire construction crew disappeared without a trace, as if history itself was programmed to self-censor. Some theories suggest that after the tomb was completed, thousands of laborers, artisans, architects, even the logistics crews who hauled dirt were executed. Not because they rebelled, not because they were careless, but because they knew too much. They were the living witnesses to an obsessive masterpiece, an underground city with mercury rivers, deadly crossbow traps, and thousands of life-sized statues modeled after real people. A legacy of power, and like any political mafia power, does not tolerate those who hold its secrets. At that time, China had no NDAs, no whistleblower protection laws. The only guarantee that you would not spill the secrets was death. And here lies one of the most bizarre paradoxes of the Qin Empire. On one hand, an obsession with immortality; on the other, a readiness to erase everyone who helped build that immortality. As if Qin Shi Huang believed to create an eternal realm, the people who made it must vanish, leaving only the product, pure, uncontested. That logic sounds horrific, but it is not unfamiliar. Egyptian pharaohs had workers killed after building their tombs. The Inca Empire sacrificed the living inside the tombs of kings. Qin Shi Huang He industrialized it. A mass delete the entire personnel folder operation, so no one could ever alter the original file. Imagine being an artisan, 20 years old, chosen for the sacred project of building the emperor's tomb. You sculpt armor for each warrior, carve every facial feature, and refine their expressions so they could stare into eternity with quiet threat. And when the work is done, you think, now I can go home and tell the kids about it. No. You will be part of the tomb, only difference is you are not fired in clay. Brutal, yes. Horrifying, absolutely. But for Qin Shi Huang, the fear of betrayal was greater than the fear of death. That tomb could not be exposed, because he knew if anyone lived to tell how it was built, where the treasure was hidden, the location of the traps, or the mercury rivers, then the tomb would no longer be an untouchable empire. It would just be a pin on a map. And as every true dictator understands, mystery is power. No one dares to break in if no one knows what is inside. A rumor about mercury rivers is more powerful than 100 living guards. A whisper about deadly traps is more effective than any law. And rumors do not need people, only earth. We also cannot ignore a heartbreaking detail. Perhaps those workers knew their fate, but they kept working. not out of loyalty but because they had no choice. In the empire of an absolute control freak, you have two rights to work, or to work until death. They left no memoirs, no construction diaries, no illustrations of how the tomb was built, no tweets, no stories, no behind-the-scenes YouTube videos. They left behind only one piece of evidence: the Terracotta Army lined up silent, imposing, as if standing in for the thousands of souls who once shaped every piece of that clay with their bare hands. And in a cruel twist, their disappearance made the monument even more surreal. It has no author. No one can say that statue was made by my ancestor. No one claims credit. No one demands royalties. There is no copyright, only the power of ownership. The tomb became a creation without creators, as if the heavens themselves molded it, submitting to the emperor's command. But we know the truth. It was built by human hands and buried by human blood. The only question is, do you still see the Terracotta Army as magnificent, knowing that in order for them to stand for thousands of years, tens of thousands had to lie down? Something strange happens when you stare long enough at the Terracotta Army of Qin Shi Huang. You begin to see them alive. Not because they move, they have stood still for over 2,000 years, but because no two are the same. Every face is a story. Every gaze is a different kind of vigilance. Every hairstyle, every beard, every wrinkle is sculpted as if a real person had turned to stone. In an era where mass production technology did not even exist, the creation of more than 8,000 warrior statues, each with distinct facial features, posture, and expression, was nearly unimaginable. Even modern video game companies would hesitate to render 8,000 non-player characters without copy-pasting a few templates. But no, Qin Shi Huang did not allow duplication. Because in his empire, only one person was permitted to repeat endlessly, and that was himself. This diversity raises a question: why? Why would a lifeless army need to be so intricately individualized? It is not like visitors would inspect every single face. It is not like the terracotta soldiers would need to interact or express emotion. But when viewed through the lens of power psychology, it all makes sense. The emperor's ego demanded a world that was as realistic as possible, as detailed as possible, as eternal as possible. Qin Shi Huang did not create a statue army. He recreated an ideal army where everyone had personality, but no one had command. Every soldier was a unique replica, but all bowed, all served, and all obeyed one man, the only figure who was not sculpted in clay, but laid at the center of the tomb. This collective individualization has a haunting power. It is like a society of superheroes, each with a different face, different strength, but none competing for the lead role. No one stands out. No mid-level commanders. No famous generals. All directed toward a single center, the immortal emperor. Strangely enough, this story feels very modern. In the age of social media, where everyone tries to craft a unique profile, we still live in an ecosystem where everything must serve the algorithm. Every selfie, every status update, every TikTok is an attempt to stand out, yet all must obey a logic that seeks attention from a system that sees no one, only counts views. Qin Shi Huang may not have had artificial intelligence, but he had something even more powerful, a totalizing will to control to the point where even diversity was programmed. Every statue was a person, but none had the right to determine their own fate. Sound familiar? There is an even bolder theory that the Terracotta Army was based on actual soldiers of the time. Not imagined figures, but lifelike models drawn from reality. If true, then this is not just a work of art. It is the largest facial recognition database of the ancient world. a human archive where each individual was backed up in clay, ready to serve their master even after their flesh had long decayed. So while we worry today about facial data being harvested by public cameras, the emperor's soldiers were already 3D scanned and permanently stored as underground warriors. Not to protect the nation, but to serve as a backdrop to the immortality of one man. And that is what makes the paradox so bitter: personalization in service of the collective, but the collective serves only one. No democracy, no empowerment, just the illusion of humanity arranged like Lego bricks to fit the emperor's ego. And if there is one hidden artist behind this entire monumental creation, it is not the laborers who died. It is fear. The fear of being forgotten. The fear that death is not the end, but the loss of control. And to fight that fear, the emperor built an army so absurdly diverse, yet so chillingly obedient. They stand there. No one speaks. No one moves. But when you look at them, you hear an entire political speech. I am unique, I exist, but I bow. And if that is not the perfect symbol of a sophisticated dictatorship, what else could be? In history, there are two kinds of people who build statues: those who want to be remembered, and those who want others to never be allowed to forget. Qin Shi Huang belonged to the second kind, with absolute intensity. And the Terracotta Army do not call them works of art. They are an eternal media campaign molded from clay, powered by obsession, and aimed at one audience: the future. Imagine you are a tourist from the 23rd century, fresh out of a dark cyberpunk world, stumbling into an archaeological site. You do not speak ancient Chinese, cannot read Han script, have no Google Translate. But you see thousands of silent warriors standing guard around something invisible buried deep underground, and you understand. You understand someone was here. Someone whose power was so vast. They could not die like an ordinary person. That was the goal. A message that transcends language, outlives time, and defies logic. No texts, no words, only images. Because Qin Shi Huang understood what every modern public relations expert knows by heart vision is the ultimate weapon of propaganda. That so-called army was not built to fight battles, not to repel invaders. They stand there solemn, majestic, overwhelming, like an ancient battalion of influencers, silent but effective. Every statue is a permanent post, needing no hashtags, no SEO, and yet spreading power like a virus. The Qin Empire collapsed just a few years after the emperor died, but his media legacy remains untouched. No Facebook, no Wikipedia, just a field of warrior statues and the strange truth they have been more effective than any branding campaign ever created. Why? Because they do not just represent power, they recreate power. They make you, whether you live in the year 2025 or 3025, feel that you are standing before something too immense to ignore. In other words, Qin Shi Huang built an empire that needed no one to govern it after he was gone. No parliament, no heirs, no real army, just statues, programmed to stand still. But in that stillness is a terrifying declaration: I am here. Forever. You are not allowed to forget. Compare that with modern monuments, Mount Rushmore, the Statue of Liberty, and you will see the difference. They represent ideals, beliefs, hope. The Terracotta Army, they are a threat glazed in clay. This is the man who once controlled everything, and he still controls your perception. Here, power does not lie in a sword. It lies in the empty gaze of thousands of statues. The kind of gaze that does not look at you, but still makes you feel watched. No one smiles. No one backs down. They stand as if frozen from a collective dream. And you, though you never lived under the Qin dynasty, are still trapped inside a narrative written by one man. You may ask, did anyone survive to witness the success of this campaign? The answer is no. But that does not matter. Qin Shi Huang did not do this to be praised. He did not need to win an election. He had no deadline. He did it because he wanted to dominate even history itself, not the history of his lifetime, but how we remember him 2,000 years later. Some modern historians call this monumental narcissism, but even that sounds too mild. This was a supercharged form of strategic communication, where every element, architecture, sculpture, layout, scale was calculated to burn into your memory an experience you never actually lived. Put differently, this is emperor-scale gaslighting of the future. You cannot argue with a clay statue. You cannot ask, is this true or was it fair? Because the statue does not answer. It just stands there, as evidence, as warning, as a sentence unspoken. This is what happens when one man controls both immortality and the deaths of others. Qin Shi Huang did not just want to be a king. He wanted to be the main character in every future archive. And he pulled it off with a propaganda campaign that has no words, no ending, and no off switch. If you think Apple is the most secure tech company in the world, with its supposedly unhackable iPhones, then you have clearly never tried breaking into the tomb of Qin Shi Huang. Because compared to the physical firewalls designed by China's first emperor, things like Face ID and two-factor authentication are nothing but child's play. Qin Shi Huang's tomb is an underground fortress not meant for the living. No one is allowed to visit. No one is allowed to explore. No one even knows exactly what it looks like. Why? Because in the logic of a man obsessed with power, death is not the end, it is the most vulnerable phase of all. And if you cannot trust anyone even after death, then you are forced to do what Qin Shi Huang did: build a deadly security system. Welcome to the underground dungeon, where you do not need a password. Just stepping on the wrong tile could activate an automatic crossbow trap, capable of turning you into a pincushion. Yes, ancient texts and modern geological surveys both confirm the tomb was rigged with arrow-firing mechanisms straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. Except these were not for Hollywood. They were for anyone foolish enough to try. And if you think you could just run, think again. You would still have to swim through a river of mercury. That is right mercury. While the Egyptians used Nile water to ventilate tombs, Qin Shi Huang went with deadly liquid metal. These artificial rivers were laid out to replicate the great waterways of China, the Yellow River, the Yangtze, not for poetic effect, but to symbolize that he was entombed in the very map of his own dominion. Mercury was not just symbolic. It was chemical armor, a toxic element suspended in the air, seeping into the soil, capable of killing anyone who dared come too close. Even today, archaeologists have not excavated the tomb's center, partly for fear of damaging the structure, but mostly because of toxic exposure. 2,000 years later, it still functions as one of history's earliest biohazard defense systems. This is no longer a tomb. This is the encrypted data vault of an empire. A server holding a backup of imperial power, no access granted, no updates allowed, no debugging permitted. Everything must remain untouched, because if someone gets in, everything crumbles. Not just the physical structure, but the symbol itself. Qin Shi Huang understood immortality does not lie in stone, but in fear. And nothing spreads fear better than knowing that one wrong step could cost you your life in the name of history. To preserve this untouchable status, the tomb has another secret weapon mystery. No one knows the exact location of the tomb's central chamber within the vast complex. There is no map, no coordinates. All records are vague. This makes the tomb a kind of Schrödinger's tomb. It exists, and yet it cannot be reached. And so it lives on in the imagination. Think about it. If someone actually entered the central tomb, turned on a light, and live-streamed it on TikTok, what would happen? 1. The legend ends. 2. People are disappointed. And 3. The symbolic power of Qin Shi Huang is shattered. So the fact that the tomb remains sealed, unopened, is exactly what he wanted. No one sees it, so no one is allowed to doubt it. And that makes him victorious once again in his battle against death. In today's world, we encrypt our data with bits, bytes, and blockchain. But he used clay mercury and crossbows. The purpose, however, was the same: to preserve power forever, untouchable, unforgettable. Perhaps that is why the tomb of Qin Shi Huang remains one of the most famous archaeological sites, never actually excavated. Like a permanently locked iPhone, no one dares to crack it for fear that the system might self-destruct. And as the world continues to evolve, the tomb still stands like a ghost server from the past, running silently in the background of human memory. No one opens it, no one deletes it. Because everyone instinctively understands this is forbidden data where the dead still hold the key. The year was 1974. Just an ordinary day in the outskirts of Xi'an, China. A group of farmers was digging a well during a long drought. They were hoping to find water. Instead, they struck history. More specifically, a head. Not a human head. A sculpted one. Cold to the touch. A solemn face. Eyes staring off into the distance, expressionless, as if it had been standing there for 2,000 years, waiting to be discovered. And from that moment on, the world changed. Excavation began. From one statue came dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. A legion slowly emerged, standing upright, weapons in hand, as if they had just marched out of a military parade held 2 millennia ago. The press called it the greatest archaeological discovery of the century. But beneath all the excitement was something unsettling. Because what was being pulled from the earth was not just terracotta, but power fossilized. Archaeologists did not just uncover statues, they uncovered a world. A copy-paste of life military formations, logistics, horse-drawn chariots, full camp models, everything laid out in perfect tactical alignment. Not for display, but for operation inside the immortal imagination of a man who had long been dead. When scientists looked at the army, they were stunned. No 2 statues were alike. It was as if each warrior was a replica of a real person. But those people were gone, only the statues remained. Individuality frozen in time. And among the thousands of distinct faces, only one figure was missing: Qin Shi Huang. He was not sculpted. He did not stand among them. He lay deeper at the center where no one has dared to step. Why not mercury, radiation, arrow traps? But there is another reason unspoken: the fear of breaking the dream. Because once you open the heart of the tomb, you do not just destroy architecture, you shatter the narrative. The story of an eternal empire, of untouchable power, of a whisper that has lasted 2,000 years. I am still here. Archaeologists began to understand they were not just excavating the past. They were unlocking an ancient propaganda machine. Each statue was not simply a historical artifact. It was a visual speech designed to hit the viewer psychologically. And whether you are Chinese American or extraterrestrial, when you see it, you understand one thing: this is power that is not up for debate. Researchers started analyzing every detail: the firing techniques, the original paint, the handcrafted marks. And what they uncovered was a society that functioned on absolute obedience. A project requiring hundreds of thousands of workers completed over decades, not to serve the living, but to fulfill the dream of one man after death. To put it bluntly, the tomb is not just cultural heritage. It is a porcelain indictment of a power structure so centralized, there was no room left for humanity. And the deeper they dug, the more the line between reality and fantasy blurred. There were soldiers, officials, musicians, artists, but no freedom. Architecture and creativity without escape. The tomb feels like a grand theater where a play has been performed for 2,000 years with no audience, no narrator, only actors frozen forever following a script buried with the director. Modern visitors come stand before thousands of warriors and bow their heads, not out of fear, but out of awe. Because it feels like they have stepped into a world not made to be looked at, but to make you unable to look away. No one leaves the site without carrying one question. If someone can still control the living after death, is that even death? That question that is Qin Shi Huang's true legacy. A dangerous one, a haunting one, a form of power that transcends biology, defies history, and lodges itself deep in the minds of all who have ever stepped into that world of statues. Qin Shi Huang was the first emperor to unify China. But if he had stopped there, he might have been remembered as a reformer, a military genius. Instead, he chose to be remembered as an eternal entity. The problem is, humans are not programmed to be eternal. Flesh decays, dynasties fall, names fade, but Qin Shi Huang refused to accept that. To him, death was not a destiny. It was a system error that needed to be patched immediately. And to fix that bug, he did not turn to philosophy, religion, or acceptance like other ancient sages. He turned to architecture, terracotta, military strategy, and mercury. He built a world where he was the center, the main character, the very definition of existence even after death. His ego was so immense, no societal framework could contain it. No ruler before him dared proclaim themselves the first emperor of all under heaven. No one else built an underground city to continue ruling after their body had turned to ash. No one else suffocated future history with a silent army of clay that threatened like thunder. We often think of death as the great equalizer: kings die, commoners die. But Qin Shi Huang had no intention of dying with the commoners. He wanted to level up, like updating firmware from man to myth, from finite to immortal, from being to idea. And it was that fear of death, that fear of being forgotten, outpaced, replaced, that drove him to do the unimaginable, to kill, to protect secrets, to sculpt statues as profiles, to build traps, to guard a corpse. The tomb was never meant to be a mausoleum. It was the final firewall shielding the emperor's colossal ego from the virus of oblivion. Every statue, every weapon, every brick served not religion, not descendants, but the most hyper-personalized legacy ever recorded. Sounds insane. Look around the modern world, a place where people obsess over legacy, where CEOs want their names etched onto rockets, where billionaires race to invest in biological immortality, where social media turns every human into a personal PR campaign. Qin Shi Huang was not outdated. He was just an early adopter. If there is one difference, it is this: he succeeded. His empire fell, but his name endured. It is more alive now than ever. Because he did not write his legacy, he mass-produced it. No one can forget an army nearly 7 feet tall, or about 2 meters, with thousands of cold stone stairs cutting across centuries. And that brings us to the final question, not just for history, but for everyone alive today: is there any limit to the human ego once it is fueled by the fear of being forgotten? Qin Shi Huang answered, no. He went the farthest. Farther than any emperor. Farther than any dictator. Farther than any poet-philosopher. Because while they used words to preserve themselves, he used space. He used time. He used silence. To him, death was not the end. It was the handoff between two dynasties, the dynasty of visible power and the dynasty of invisible influence. And he never lost his throne. He merely changed how he ruled from speech to gaze, from command to obsession. If you ask, was it worth it? History in its coldest voice has already answered. He is the only man in the world, dead for 2,000 years, who still has you reading this sentence. Welcome your awakening to a beautiful morning in the 17th century. Sunlight streams through a patch of mold-spotted rice paper. Screenbirds twitter on the thatched roof, and the smell, yes, that is horse manure blasting into your face, as if nature said, "Welcome to Edo, Japan, where honor is everything and soap has yet to be invented." You sit bolt upright, your head pounding as though it had been used for a pillow made of stone for 300 years. Your hand brushes your hair. Wait, where is it? Half of your head has been shaved clean. The rest is tied up in what can only be described as a botched, steamed tuna top knot, like a failed sushi attempt. Before you can even question it, a wooden training block echoes outside the courtyard. Every samurai must rise before the sun. If not, you will rise before your ancestors. The voice belongs to an old guard, with a face as cold as fermented tofu. My, that's what you're about to have for breakfast. You try to stand, but the straw mat sticks to your back, like industrial strength adhesive. The scent of mold sweat and insect carcasses, petrified after a rainy season, without bathing a melodic symphony from hell. And yes, beneath your feet, what you thought was your pillow turns out to be the not quite decomposed rear end of the gate guard horse. Welcome to honor. You are handed your outfit called a warrior kimono, though it looks more like a bathrobe chewed to tatters by a dog. The material linen as rough as sandpaper dyed with leaves and horse urine, true to the all-natural but odorous tradition. Wearing it, you immediately itch from the soul. But solace comes in the form of a treasure, a katana. The legendary weapon, a samurai's symbol, the pride of the clan. There is only one minor problem: you are forbidden to use it. Only wear it. Do not touch it. Do not draw it. And if you happen to scratch it, you must apologize in your own blood, says the instructor as he polishes the blade with the hair of the trainee before you. You nod. Not out of understanding, but out of fear. If you do not nod at a 90-degree angle, you will earn a one-way ticket to your ancestors. Breakfast is served in the barracks. Each receives a bowl of rice, or rather what once was rice before it became a low-grade fungus. You dare a bite and it feels like chewing construction foam dipped in dishwashing liquid. But you swallow. For skipping a meal earns you a penalty of writing 100 times "A samurai lives for honor, not for the stomach." Farewell, Uber Eats, while you struggle to digest whatever that was. A drum sounds. Everyone stands immediately. No one speaks. No one asks. Faces are solemn, as if attending their own wedding. You stand too. If you did not, you would stand alone from a hanging scaffold. The flag-raising ceremony, or rather sword-raising ceremony, begins. Every samurai must kneel, bow their head, and pledge to their sword as if it were a marriage proposal. You are my soul. You are my honor. If I am wrong, kill me first. You speak through teary eyes, not from emotion, but because a mosquito just bit your left eye. A shout follows. Training begins. You are thrust into an empty field. In front, a straw target representing the enemy. Behind, the instructor with his whip. The first lesson, the art of dying beautifully. Not a joke. You are taught how to kneel, draw the short dagger tanto, and carve your belly in an L shape precisely, swiftly, and you must smile while doing it. Frowning is unseemly. You ask, "Do we learn to fight?" He answers, "That is secondary." The main part is learning how to die with dignity once you have lost. You are speechless. The class laughs, not because you were funny, but because you just discovered the true role of a mediocre samurai, not as a victor, but as one who dies in order. At training's end, you are handed a piece of paper, your transfer order, to become an assistant to a daimyo famous for his goat beard collection. No congratulations. People just look at you as though you drew the short straw with a heavy stone tied to your foot. You sigh. Not from fatigue, but because for the first time you understand what living for honor means, in the definition of one who has no right to choose death. You bow step into your new barracks. Behind the sun rises. Before you a sword laid out on the mat. Not to fight, but to look upon each day and remember that here, honor is not something you live for, but something you die correctly so others can behold. Congratulations, you have just been promoted. From a nameless low-ranking samurai you are now the poetry attendant of Lord Daimyo. No, you did not miss here. Not a bodyguard, not a frontline warrior, but the one who must sit and listen to poetry and cry at the right time if it is sad. Sounds grand like some courtly cultural editor, but in reality, this is hell wrapped in honor and lit by paper lanterns. You arrive at the Lord's castle. Massive gates, soldiers lined up, drums pounding like the emperor himself is about to visit. You imagine stepping into a place of power, strategy, and intrigue. But no. You walk straight into a tea room that smells like dried fish and incense. And at the center of it all, there he is, Lord Daimyo. Known for poetry as flowing as clouds, swordplay as pointless as slicing air, and a heart like a dried spring. In other words, an eccentric old man with the power of life and death, and a deep obsession with goat beards and haiku. What is your name, he asks without looking at you. You are about to answer, but the steward subtly shakes his head. Turns out it is a rhetorical question. To answer is to interrupt. And interrupting the daimyo, usually your last words. He begins reciting poetry. You do not understand a thing, but you must find it moving. And here finding it moving is not a nod. It is a full emotional performance. Glistening eyes, hands, gripping your robe. Breath trembling as if you just heard your mother's final words. If he does not see you deeply moved, you will be introduced to the executioner in the stone garden. After the poem comes the tea ceremony. Think you can relax now? No. This is a test of silence. Pouring tea must not make a sound. Lifting the cup must be noiseless. When you finish, you must stare into the bottom as if seeing the meaning of life. Breathing through your nose, treason. Sipping too loudly, an offense to the heavens. One samurai before you was exiled to an island for yawning while the daimyo poured tea. Once you pass the tea exam, you receive your first assignment: clean the Lord's goat beard collection. No, that is not a metaphor. He collects real goat beards from famous goats, dried and preserved in glass cases. Each morning, you must polish them with silk cloth. If a single hair falls, it is considered betrayal against the animal kingdom. But it does not stop there. When he recites poetry, you must also ring a tiny bell on beat to enhance the emotion. Ringing off beat, shakta, breaking his inspiration. Breaking inspiration. Breaking his meditation. Breaking his meditation. Breaking your jaw, courtesy of the bodyguards. In the evening, you are rewarded with dinner beside him. The table is full grilled fish, pickled vegetables, seaweed soup, and one special dish, the self-executed fish head. He personally decapitated the fish that morning, then used its blood as sauce. You must eat it while praising his technique. The way you split the skull without cracking the cheekbone was masterful. Say nothing, you lack appreciation. Say too little. You have no heart. Use the wrong word, you are a linguistic traitor. After dinner comes the sword ritual performance. Everyone lines up to offer a blessing to his sword. Examples include, "May your blade carve rain into poetry. May your sword shine brighter than truth. You make one up, may your blade be as sharp as compassion." He stops, looks at you. You start to sweat. That line might lack punch. Thankfully, the steward forces a chuckle and changes the subject. But in your head, the death bell tolls. You return to your quarters, your robe soaked with sweat, from sitting still all day. No battle, no blood. Just bowing, crying, praising, and cleaning goat hair. Yet you feel more exhausted than if you had climbed Mount Fuji on your knees. You glance at the sword in the corner. Each time you look, it seems to whisper, "I was forged for battle. You were forged to wipe me clean." You sigh, not from sadness, but because you realize dying in war is not the hard part. Surviving in humiliation, now that is an art. And Lord Daimyo tomorrow, he will compete in a poetry duel with another lord. You will be going with him, and if he loses, the one responsible for his emotional collapse will be you. As for honor, it is still there. Sitting on the shelf, right next to goat beard number 8, the lightly curled one taken from a spring goat last year. Welcome to the special skill class for elite warriors, where you do not learn how to win, but how to exit this world with the refined aesthetic of Japanese tradition. The morning begins while the sun is still yawning, dew clings to bamboo leaves, and the training grounds echo with wooden clappers like a call to the spirits of generations past. You drag your aching body to the field. No one speaks. Everyone's eyes are lowered, shoulders drooping like willow branches. Because everyone knows today is the main event, training in the ritual of departing with honor. The instructor steps out. No smile, no greeting. He simply points to the row of wooden knives in front of each trainee, his voice cold as ice water. Those who do not know how to end should not have begun. You sit on the straw mat. Class begins. The first lesson, the proper posture for serene sitting. Your back must be straight. Your eyes clear, shoulders relaxed, but not hunched, like you are dodging the sun. The goal to radiate the presence of someone ready, without resentment, without hesitation. As if you are preparing for the national team, in the event of exiting the stage of life with grace. Next comes how to hold the knife. Not too tightly that shows fear. Not too loosely that disrupts the ritual. The grip must be just enough to say, "I do this, not because I must, but because I understand the game is over." You hold the wooden knife. Inhale. The instructor approaches, eyes scanning you from head to toe, and says quietly, "You look like you are slicing cucumbers." Again. You readjust. Fix your shoulders. This time your eyes focus. No more offbeat energy. The instructor circles the group, judging each trainee like a final exam proctor. Good. Like a statue embracing the wind. Not quite. You look like you are hiding a cheat sheet. Better. Like a cherry blossom falling without complaint. And to you, acceptable. But do not purse your lips like you just drank vinegar. The class chuckles softly. In an atmosphere stretched tight like a bowstring, that small laugh feels like a miracle. But not for long. The next lesson, facial expression training. Sounds ridiculous, but it is taken with utmost seriousness. You must train your face to welcome the end with complete serenity. No furrowed brows, no wide eyes, and especially no tears. Because tears suggest regret. And to a warrior, regret is as luxurious as shampoo. A classmate Tetsuo is not so lucky this round. He widens his eyes when the instructor says, "One must embrace death as calmly as watching flowers bloom." The instructor taps the floor. Tetsuo, you are performing like an extra who forgot his line. Everyone knows Tetsuo's weekly conduct score just drifted downstream into the river of failed Zen. The final session is the comprehensive ritual performance. Each person must enact the departure ceremony in front of the entire team. Wooden knife, straw mat, and the instructor's gaze, cold, sharp, unyielding. You sit, grasp the knife, breathe 3 times, and deliver your mock farewell as if you were the lead actor in a play with no second showing. When you finish, the instructor nods, acceptable, like a butterfly that knows it only lives for 1 season. You exhale your first breath of relief since arriving here, but that peace lasts barely 3 heartbeats. Tetsuo, your roommate, goes next. He falters. His grip is off. His eyes dart. Sweat drips onto the mat. The instructor says nothing, just turns away. No words needed. Everyone understands that was not a failed performance. It was a bell tolling. That night, Tetsuo is not in the barracks. No one mentions it. No one asks. His name disappears from the duty list. His mat is folded, neatly stored in the supply room like it had never hosted a night's sleep. You sit there holding your worn wooden sword. You look at it as if seeing yourself in it. A tool, a symbol, a reminder that here combat skill is decoration. The ability to leave properly is the real requirement. You write in your journal, at first to vent. But the more you write, the more it feels like you are signing a contract. No one is forcing you to live this way, but everyone quietly nudges you into the mold. And that mold is made of honor. The final line you write: each day I practice how to end until I forget where to begin. Night falls. The night drum echoes in the distance. A cat meows in the kitchen. The faint scent of weak tea drifts through the window. You sit there, in the dark, not sleeping, because tomorrow might be the final exam. An ordinary afternoon, just like any other. The sun slides down the rooftops like a lazy cat. The wind rustles through the fields, and you are trying to concentrate on polishing the hilt of a sword with a silk cloth of questionable origin, when the steward walks in with a look that is both solemn and faintly funereal. Lord Daimyo wishes to see you at tonight's banquet. You freeze. A banquet tonight. There is no holiday, no victory, no wedding, no birth. Nothing to celebrate except, it seems, you. An older comrade places a hand gently on your shoulder. Go, he says, but do not fill yourself too much. You manage a faint smile, but something in the air makes your stomach curl like a boiled shrimp. You wash. That is, you wipe yourself down with a damp towel that has been recycled since last year's festival. You dress in the ceremonial robe, ash-colored kimono, solemn, elegant, and extremely easy to clean blood from if necessary. You fix your hair, check your expression in the bronze mirror. Not too cheerful, you would seem heartless. Not too worried, you would seem lacking composure. The correct expression, just enough of a smile like you have just bumped into an old debt from a past life. You enter the grand hall. The banquet takes place in a strange silence. No music, no fan dancing, only flickering lanterns and glances that all avoid your eyes. You sit. Before you is a carefully arranged tray, grilled fish, fragrant rice, steaming miso soup. It looks like a special evening in the sense that it might be your last supper. Lord Daimyo enters, wearing a black robe embroidered with silver thread, holding a paper fan painted with chrysanthemums, and a smile. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile someone has before they read a poem or a name. He sits, does not look at you, simply says, there are those who leave behind only one memorable story in life. and tonight you shall write yours. You swallow dryly. The grilled fish suddenly turns to sand in your mouth. Your hand reaches for the chopsticks, then recoils as though touching your own will. Then a servant steps forward. On a wooden tray, a letter, sealed with wax, stamped with the daimyo's personal crest. You do not need to open it. One look and you know. It is an assignment letter, not for a mission, but for a full-time resignation by ritual. You receive the letter with both hands, bow your head. The room falls completely silent. The others chew their rice, noiselessly breathe without motion, not out of fear, but because etiquette forbids disrupting this glorious moment. You withdraw from the table. Back in your quarters, a pure white robe is already laid out. A roll of paper and ink sits on the desk. Your job now is to write a farewell. Concise, poetic, and with dignity, you sit. Brush touches paper, but your mind is blank. You think of your mother, of the classmate who disappeared, of the eyes of the old soldier who patted your back earlier. You think of everything except the reason why you have to do this. For honor, but you did nothing wrong. For tradition, but who created this tradition? For Lord Daimyo. But does he even remember your name? You write, not with emotion, but with the habit forged by months of bowing your head. And when it is done, you place the brush down, then look at the sword placed before you, not a weapon, but punctuation. Outside the door, a soft drumbeat. That is the signal. It is time. You step into the rear courtyard, where the ceremony will take place. Lanterns have been lit. The mat has been spread. Witnesses are already seated, not too many, but enough to later say they were there when a legend was born. You kneel. An attendant approaches, offering the ceremonial dagger. You take it with both hands, eyes still lowered. But at that exact moment, a soldier rushes into the courtyard in a panic. He whispers something into the daimyo's ear. The lord frowns, then waves his hand. Another attendant walks over to you, bows, and says, Lord Daimyo has changed his mind. You may stand down. You freeze, holding the dagger, unsure where to place it. No one claps. No one breathes a sigh of relief. Everyone simply stares at you as if you just ruined a century-old play. You leave the courtyard in silence, each step echoing like unheard whispers. You survive, but you are not acknowledged. No one celebrates. No one embraces you. No one meets your gaze again. You survived, but no one says you deserve to. Honor, the thing meant to be preserved, is now the very reason you have been quietly erased from society. Back in your room, you look at the letter again, then the farewell you wrote. You fold it, slip it into your sleeve. Not because you plan to reuse it, but because next time there may be no one to change their mind. You do not sleep. You just sit there watching the lantern outside the veranda. Its flame flickers. Just like your faith in the art of honor you once believed was the purpose of your life. You lived. The story was supposed to end in the rear courtyard under the lantern light, with a ritual choreographed down to every breath. But it did not. A whisper, a hand gesture, a last-minute decision from someone you never truly understood, and so you survived. The problem is, no one wanted that. You returned to the barracks like a ghost with a residency permit. No one said anything. No one asked. No one met your eyes. That evening when you entered the mess hall, your bowl was gone from the shelf. No one took it. It simply no longer existed. A fellow trainee looked at you, then turned away, as if you were a historical stain no one was allowed to mention. You once lived with them, ate with them, trained beside them, and now you were the one who blackened the family crest of collective honor. You sat in the corner. The rice was cold, the soup bland. Even your seat felt as chilly as your existence. You lived, but you were no longer part of the team. You became the one left behind. And in a culture of honor, being left behind is not a blessing. It is a shameful reminder that you failed to complete your role as the script demanded. The next day, you lined up for training as usual. But no one stood beside you. Your position was temporarily reassigned to the end of the line near the sand pile used for polishing weapons. The instructor walked by, stopped, looked at you. No scolding, no reprimand, just a slight shake of the head as if seeing a rusted sword among freshly sharpened blades. At noon, you went to the supply room to get your equipment. The quartermaster asked. Name you answered. He looked in his book, flipped a few pages, frowned. Not here. Are you sure you still belong here? You smiled faintly. Not because it was funny, but because it was the most reasonable question you had heard all week. You were still in the barracks, but no longer in the records. No assignments, no roll call, not mentioned in any ceremony. You had become a human-shaped absence. Whispers began to spread. He is the one who was spared. The daimyo changed his mind. Maybe he had some old debt to repay. Or he lacked the spirit to complete the ritual. And so from a warrior once ready to depart, you became a symbol of something incomplete. You wandered the courtyard, listened to birds, watched flowers fall. Everything still beautiful if you were not someone whose membership in honor had just been revoked. You saw the old soldier who had patted your back before the banquet. He did not greet you. He only asked, "Have you rewritten the poem?" You blinked, confused. He smiled gently. The poem that night was for an ending. You are still alive. You need a new one. You did not know how to respond. You could not write anymore, because your mind held nothing worth recording, only blank stretches like pages scrubbed clean. No goodbyes, no new beginnings, only meaningless continuation. You requested to leave camp, hiked into the mountains, into the forest, far from the compound. No one stopped you, no one asked. You sat beneath a tree overlooking the misty city below. The evening drum echoed through the valley. You realized that was the warrior's call. But this time it was not for you, because you were no longer a warrior. Not a traitor either. Not a hero. Not a disgrace. You were simply the absence. When you returned to the barracks, your bed was already taken. No message. No apology. Just life continued. Without you. You rolled up your old mat, took it to the corner of the veranda, laid under a leaky roof, listening to the rain seep through layer after layer of clothing. You were not sad, nor angry, just silent. Because you realized survival is what everyone wishes for, but in a society that worships beautiful endings, to survive the wrong way is not a reward. It is a suspended sentence. You looked up at the sky. No moon tonight. You exhaled cold breath mingling with the scent of damp earth. You whispered to yourself, "If I am no longer a samurai, then what am I?" No one answered, and no answer was needed. Because in this era, a question not accepted means the one who asked it does not exist. You lived. Day after day you still breathed, still ate, still slept, not out of choice, but as routine. But what frightened you was not the isolation, not the stairs, not the darkness falling on your tattered bedroll in the barracks. What frightened you was that everything kept moving exactly as before, except you no longer belonged. You once thought surviving was a blessing. Then you believed it was a punishment. Now you do not think at all. Because thought has dimmed like an oil lamp left to burn with no one to trim the wick. The sword still sits in the corner of your room. You have not polished it in a long time, not out of laziness, but because you know it will never be used again. Not in battle, not for protection, not for departing with honor. It just lies there, a heavy ornament steeped in silent accusation. One afternoon, as the barracks prepared for a new deployment, you saw young soldiers being called by name. They stood tall eyes bright, speaking of glory, of victory, of blood and honor. You stood by in silence. They walked past you. No one greeted you. One of them whispered, "Beware the one who carries a blade but has never drawn it." You turned away, not out of anger, but because they were right. You are the embodiment of what everyone fears, survival without reason. Not long after, the daimyo made an inspection visit. All samurai lined up in perfect order to greet him. You were ordered to remain in the supply shed. For the first time in your life, you were officially told to stay hidden. Not for misconduct, not for betrayal, simply because your presence made the legend uncomfortable. You sat among moldy rice crates and broken armor, wondering if honor is everything and you no longer have honor. Then what do you have if the sword is the soul of a samurai and you no longer wield it? Then what is it that breathes inside your chest each day you quietly requested to leave the barracks? No one stopped you. No one asked why. There was no farewell meal, no parting ceremony. You packed a worn fabric bag, holding a few threadbare robes, a wooden bowl, and a small notebook filled with poems no one had ever heard. You walked away from the gates at dawn while the dew still clung to the grass before the morning drums sounded. No glances followed you. No voices called you back. You disappeared from the place once called home like a typo in an epic no one dared to correct. You passed through quiet villages living as a wanderer, hauling water, harvesting rice, repairing roofs. No one knew you had been a samurai. No one asked. And for the first time you felt light. No one called you honorable. No one forced you to die properly. No one ordered you to stay silent when you disagreed. You were just a man, an ordinary man. You lived this way for many years. Then one day a group of young soldiers passed through your village. They sat in a tea shop speaking of honor, of loyalty, of noble sacrifice. You listened from a quiet corner, one hand holding a bowl, the other massaging your lower back. One of them asked if you were called to end with honor. Would you do it? Another answered instantly, "Of course, that is what it means to be a samurai." You chuckled softly, not with mockery, just the laugh of someone who has walked to the end of the road they dream of. It did not lead to glory. It only led to an empty room. That night you pulled out your old notebook. The last page was still blank. You wrote one final line. "This sword has never drawn blood, but it once made it hard to breathe. Now I live not for anyone, not under anyone. And in doing so, perhaps I have finally cut the most frightening chain of all, the expectations of others." You folded the notebook, tucked it into your bag, looked up at the sky, and for the first time you saw a sky not divided between glory and shame, only drifting clouds and the wind. You smiled. Not because you finally understood what honor meant, but because you finally no longer needed to.